The dust hangs low over the Apulian plain, the air already hot enough to sting your lungs as thousands of feet grind the earth into powder. Shields knock together, horns call, and the mass in front of you keeps moving forward whether you want it to or not. If you were standing in the Roman center at Cannae into 16 BCE, packed shoulder to shoulder, you probably wouldn't survive, not because you lacked courage, but because you were about to be maneuvered rather than fought. Hannibal's army did not meet Rome head-on in the way Mediterranean warfare expected. It curved, bent, and invited pressure like a trap that closes only after you commit. The Battle of Cannae is an officially documented turning point in military history because it demonstrated the double envelopment with terrifying clarity. Hannibal placed his weakest infantry, Gauls and Iberians, at the center, deliberately pushing them forward in a convex arc. As Roman legions advanced, their strength became a liability. Their dense manipular formation functioned brilliantly in frontal pressure, but here it pressed too far, too fast. On the wings, elite African infantry held firm, while Hannibal's cavalry shattered Roman horsemen and returned to strike from behind. The army functioned as a coordinated system, rather than independent units, a sharp contrast to most contemporary forces. The strength of this formation lay in timing and discipline. Soldiers needed restraint as much as aggression, especially the center, trained to yield without collapsing. Its weakness was equally clear. If the Roman center had broken through decisively, Hannibal's line could have split. Ancient sources hint at how close this moment was, a point of academic debate among historians comparing Polybius and Livy's accounts. A lesser-known fact is that Hannibal likely rehearsed controlled withdrawal beforehand, something rare in ancient armies. Compared to Greek hoplite phalanxes or Roman legions, this force demanded flexibility over brute cohesion, marking the moment warfare began to favor maneuver over mass. The Roman advance continues, step after grinding step, and from inside the formation it feels like success. The enemy center bends, space opens, and officers shout for pressure. What you cannot see is that this victory is being measured by Hannibal almost to the yard. The mechanics of double envelopment were not improvised at Cannae. They relied on geometry, training, and a ruthless understanding of how armies behave when they think they are winning. At Cannae, the Carthaginian army functioned like a hinge. The central infantry did not retreat randomly, it withdrew in controlled stages, maintaining cohesion while reshaping the line from convex to concave. This required soldiers skilled in formation discipline, capable of stepping back under pressure without panic. On the flanks, the African infantry fought in dense, heavily armored blocks, holding position until the Roman center had advanced far enough to expose its sides. Cavalry superiority completed the design, sealing the encirclement. Once the Roman horse collapsed, the formation's strength was its interdependence. No single unit could succeed alone. Each relied on the others performing precisely. Its weakness was just as structural. If the cavalry failed, or if the center lost cohesion too quickly, the entire maneuver would unravel. Modern scholars still debate whether such precision was repeatable or uniquely enabled by Roman overconfidence, an ongoing academic argument in military history circles. A strange but telling side fact: Hannibal's African troops fought using captured Roman equipment, allowing them to blend visually into the chaos once the encirclement closed. Compared to the rigid Greek phalanx or the Roman triplex aces, this system required soldiers trained to think spatially, not just forward. It was warfare as choreography, not collision, and few armies of the ancient world could perform it twice. The killing ground at Cannae did not end the war, but it permanently altered how Rome thought about defeat. Survivors carried more than fear back to Italy, they carried questions. How could the strongest infantry system in the Mediterranean be surrounded and dismantled without collapsing? In the years after 16 BCE, Roman commanders, senators, and historians dissected the battle with an intensity that feels almost modern, turning disaster into doctrine. Officially, Rome never tried to copy Hannibal's double envelopment directly. Instead, the Roman army functioned defensively in its reforms, widening manipular spacing and emphasizing flexibility over reckless mass. The legions learned to anchor flanks more carefully, integrate allied cavalry differently, and avoid terrain that allowed total encirclement. Battles like Zama later demonstrated this adaptation, where Rome absorbed Carthaginian methods while neutralizing their strengths. The strength of Rome's response was institutional learning. Unlike many ancient states, Rome debated failure openly. Polybius later framed Cannae as a lesson in command psychology as much as tactics, an interpretation still discussed in academic debate today. The weakness, however, was cultural. Roman political pressure often rewarded aggression, making patience in battle difficult to sustain. Legionaries themselves needed new skills after Cannae, spatial awareness, controlled advance, and the ability to disengage without disorder. A lesser-known fact is that some Roman units after Cannae trained specifically for fighting. While partially surrounded, a grim but practical acknowledgement of vulnerability. Compared to Hellenistic armies, which relied on elite formations, Rome emphasized resilience across the entire force. Cannae became not a model to imitate, but a warning embedded into Roman military DNA. Centuries later, the idea of Cannae still lingered, but medieval battlefields were very different places. The noise was less organized, command slower, and formations looser, yet echoes of double envelopment appeared whenever armies tried to solve the same ancient problem: how to destroy an enemy force rather than merely push it back. The narrative flows from dusty Apulia into muddy European fields, where the lesson of encirclement was tempting but rarely mastered. Medieval armies functioned around feudal levies and small professional corps, which made coordinated maneuvers difficult. Still, battles like the Battle of Hastings in 1066 show partial attempts at tactical deception and flanking pressure. Norman cavalry feigned retreats, drawing Anglo-Saxon infantry forward before striking exposed edges. While not a true double envelopment, the logic mirrored Hannibal's center withdrawal. Academic debate often centers on whether these similarities reflect conscious imitation or parallel problem-solving under different constraints. The strength of medieval adaptations lay in shock and morale effects. Knights exploiting flanks could break formations quickly. The weakness was command fragmentation. Without centralized control or standardized training, sustaining a curved, intentional withdrawal was risky. Soldiers needed discipline rarely present among peasant levies. Skills like controlled retreat, lateral movement, and restraint under pressure were exceptional rather than standard. A lesser-known side fact is that some medieval military manuals referenced ancient authors like Vegetius, indirectly preserving knowledge of encirclement theory even if practice lagged behind. Compared to Roman legions or Carthaginian veterans, medieval forces relied more on individual valor than collective geometry. Cannae's lesson survived in concept, but not in execution. Constrained by social structure as much as tactics, the idea endured, waiting for armies capable of thinking and moving as a single organism again. When gunpowder reshaped battlefields, Cannae did not disappear, it was reread. Early modern commanders studied ancient history obsessively, and Hannibal's victory became a case study debated in academies and courts alike. The smoke of muskets replaced dust clouds, but the desire to envelop, compress, and annihilate an enemy force remained. The question was whether double envelopment could survive in an age of firearms. Armies of the 16th to 18th centuries functioned through linear formations, designed to maximize firepower. Yet battles such as Cannae were explicitly referenced by thinkers like Maurice of Nassau and later by Frederick the Great, who saw maneuver as a way to offset the rigidity of linear warfare. At Leuthen in 1757, Frederick's oblique order crushed an Austrian flank, rolling the line inward. A partial reinterpretation of encirclement adapted to musket ranges and drilled infantry. The strength of these formations was control. Soldiers were trained relentlessly to wheel, fire, and advance on command, making large-scale maneuvers possible again. The weakness was fragility. Linear troops were vulnerable during movement, and a failed flank attack could expose an army to devastating volleys. Academic debate continues over whether these battles truly echo Cannae or merely borrow its language to describe different mechanics. A strange side fact: Frederick reportedly carried classical histories with him on campaign, annotating passages about Hannibal, soldiers in these formations needed mathematical precision, counting steps, maintaining intervals, and resisting the instinct to bunch under fire. Compared to medieval armies, early modern forces regained collective discipline. But compared to Hannibal's veterans, they sacrificed adaptability for firepower. Cannae had become theory more than template, inspiring motion rather than imitation. By the modern era, Cannae had transformed from a battle into a concept. Officers no longer imagined dust and spear points, they imagined arrows on maps closing into circles. Industrial warfare expanded the scale, but the intellectual pull of double envelopment only grew stronger. Nowhere was this more explicit than in late 19th and early 20th century military thought, where Cannae became almost a doctrine rather than a historical example. Modern armies function through corps and armies rather than formations you could see from a hill. Yet the idea remained the same: fix the enemy frontally, maneuver on the flanks, and destroy cohesion rather than merely defeat units. German theorists in particular embraced this logic. Alfred von Schlieffen openly cited Hannibal, framing the Kesselschlacht, the Cauldron Battle, as a modern Cannae using railways, artillery, and operational maneuver. Battles on the Eastern Front in World War I and later during World War II to show deliberate attempts to encircle entire armies. Most famously at Tannenberg and Kiev. The strength of modern double envelopment lay in scale and speed. Motorization allowed flanks to close faster than any ancient cavalry ever could. The weakness was dependency, logistics, communication, and timing had to align perfectly. When they failed, encircling forces themselves risked overextension. Academic debate remains fierce over whether Cannae truly applies at this level, or whether modern warfare simply borrows its language to legitimize annihilation strategies. A lesser-known fact is that some German staff colleges treated Cannae almost as mythic scripture, sometimes oversimplifying its conditions. Soldiers now needed different skills: navigation, coordination across units, and endurance over days rather than hours. Compared to Hannibal's army, modern forces traded personal discipline for systemic complexity. Cannae had become both lesson and legend, powerful but dangerously seductive. Cannae endures because it offers something commanders crave: clarity. One battle appears to show how intelligence, discipline, and maneuver can overcome numerical strength and shatter an enemy completely. Across centuries, from Roman survivors to Prussian theorists, the double envelopment has been treated less as a single tactic and more as a promise that war can be decided decisively if geometry and timing are mastered. This is why Cannae is endlessly studied, reenacted on maps, and cited in doctrine. Yet its effectiveness as a universal lesson is limited. Hannibal succeeded not only because of formation, but because of circumstance, terrain, Roman psychology, cavalry superiority, and an army trained for controlled withdrawal, an extremely rare combination. Later armies that focused only on the shape of the maneuver often ignored its fragility. Double envelopment magnifies success, but it also magnifies failure. When coordination breaks down, encircling forces can be isolated, exhausted, or destroyed themselves. Historically, the most successful adaptations of Cannae have been indirect. Rome learned caution rather than imitation. Early modern commanders learned maneuver without obsession. Modern armies learned operational encirclement but paid for it with logistical strain. The true lesson of Cannae is not surround the enemy, but understand how your enemy moves, thinks, and commits. Hannibal won because he shaped Roman behavior before he closed the trap. In that sense, Cannae is less a template than a warning. Warfare rewards flexibility and punishes rigidity. Armies that treat Cannae as a formula chase a ghost. Those that treat it as a reminder of discipline, restraint, and timing inherit its real power.